They started it, we're going to finish it, I guess. We want the tariffs taken off. I mean, this was an unprovoked attack on Canada on the trade front, and it's Lutnick and Greer's boss who did it, Donald Trump. So if they want the booze back on the shelves, then take the tariffs off our products. And if you're an American, you're watching this, the prices in America went up because of tariffs, and then you, the consumer, are paying more, but the refunds are going to big business.
They started it, we're going to finish it. That line from Manitoba Premier Kinew doesn't sound like the Canada most people remember. It doesn't sound cautious, or quiet, or deferential. It sounds like a country that has decided it is no longer going to play the role of the polite partner. And that shift is now reshaping how Canada deals with the United States. The latest escalation between Canada and the United States began with tariffs. The Trump administration imposed new duties on key Canadian sectors, including steel, aluminum, and automotive products, reigniting tensions ahead of the upcoming USMCA review. Canada's response was immediate, but not broad. Instead of sweeping retaliation, provinces targeted a specific and visible sector, American alcohol. Liquor stores across multiple provinces removed U.S. products from their shelves, effectively cutting off a major export channel. Washington reacted quickly. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick called the move insulting, signaling frustration that Canada was not responding the way previous pressure campaigns had conditioned policymakers to expect. But Canada didn't adjust. Provincial leaders reinforced the decision. At the federal level, Prime Minister Mark Carney, now governing with a majority in 2026, made it clear that Canada would not enter negotiations under pressure. Talks could happen, but not on terms dictated by Washington. At the same time, Ottawa has signaled it is prepared to delay formal USMCA negotiations entirely if tariffs remain in place, effectively removing Washington's ability to force a timeline, a critical shift in leverage. What followed was not escalation in the traditional sense. It was something more structural. Canada held its position. For decades, Canada operated within a predictable framework. The United States applied pressure, Canada absorbed it, and negotiations followed a pattern of incremental compromise. That model depended on one assumption: Canada needed stability more than it needed leverage. That assumption is now breaking down. Kinew's statement reflects a broader shift in political language. Canadian leaders are no longer framing trade disputes as temporary disruptions to be smoothed over. They are treating them as structural challenges that require a firm response. This is happening in the context of a trade relationship worth hundreds of billions annually, where even small shifts in policy can move billions in cross-border flows, meaning strategic positioning now carries far greater economic weight than before. This is not about rhetoric. It is about redefining the baseline of the relationship. Refusing to concede is often misunderstood as a defensive move. In this case, it is the opposite. By declining to make concessions before negotiations even begin, Canada is sending a clear signal, not just to Washington, but to every trading partner watching this unfold. The signal is simple: access to the Canadian market is not unconditional. The alcohol ban illustrates that point in measurable terms. U.S. alcohol exports to Canada collapsed from roughly $744 million to about $208 million in a single year, a loss of over $500 million, or more than 70% of total export value. More importantly, the impact is immediate. Unlike tariffs, which can be absorbed or passed along, removing products from shelves eliminates demand entirely. That also triggered a substitution effect inside Canada, where domestic producers saw sales surge, in some cases doubling or even tripling, as consumers shifted away from U.S. brands. This transforms a political dispute into a market reality, and it forces a recalculation on the U.S. side. Under Prime Minister Mark Carney, Canada's approach has taken on a clearer strategic shape. The objective is not confrontation, but independence. That means reducing vulnerability without severing ties. Canada is actively expanding trade relationships beyond the United States, strengthening connections with Europe and Asia while investing in domestic capacity across energy, critical minerals, and manufacturing. The goal is to ensure that economic decisions are not dictated by a single external partner. Officials have openly acknowledged that recent tensions exposed Canada's overdependence on the U.S. market, accelerating efforts to diversify trade and build alternative supply chains. At the same time, Canada continues to engage with the United States, but on revised terms. Cooperation remains possible, but dependency is no longer acceptable. This is a recalibration, not a rupture. This shift is happening in a broader global environment where trade is increasingly used as a tool of leverage. The United States is not the only country applying economic pressure. China has expanded its own toolkit, using export controls and market access to influence outcomes. Europe is moving toward greater economic sovereignty, particularly in technology and energy. In that context, Canada's response is not an isolated case. It is part of a wider trend. Countries are reassessing how much leverage they are willing to concede in exchange for market access. They are asking whether stability is worth dependence. Canada's answer, increasingly, is no. A key assumption behind U.S. pressure tactics is that Canada has more to lose. The data complicates that narrative. Canada is one of the largest buyers of American goods, with deeply integrated supply chains across automotive production, energy distribution, and industrial manufacturing. These systems do not operate in isolation. Disruptions on one side affect the entire network. When Canadian provinces remove American products, the impact is not abstract. It is immediate and concentrated in specific industries. In fact, Canada's control over provincial distribution systems, particularly in sectors like alcohol, allows it to shut off market access almost instantly, giving it a unique structural advantage that tariffs alone cannot replicate. This creates a feedback loop. Pressure applied to Canada does not remain external. It returns to the U.S. economy in the form of lost sales, reduced market share, and political pressure from affected sectors. That is the constraint Washington now faces. The most significant outcome of this standoff is not the alcohol ban or the tariffs themselves. It is the shift in who defines the negotiation. By refusing to concede, Canada has disrupted the timing and structure of the process. It is no longer reacting to pressure on Washington's schedule. It is setting its own pace. That changes the balance. Negotiations, when they happen, will not begin from a position of assumed compliance. They will begin from a position of demonstrated resistance, and that alters the outcome before talks even start. They started it. We're going to finish it. What once would have sounded like an outlier now reflects a broader transformation. Canada is no longer waiting to react. It is acting first, defining limits, and enforcing them. This does not mean the end of cooperation. It means the end of automatic compromise. Canada is still negotiating. It is still engaging. But it is doing so from a different position, one where it no longer assumes that pressure must be absorbed. And that raises a larger question. If Canada is no longer the quiet partner, and if it is now willing to set the rules of engagement, what does that mean for the future of North American trade? Because once a country learns it can say no and hold that line, it rarely goes back.
If you poke a bear, they might strike back. And maybe that's the key takeaway. You know, the fact of the matter is for many Canadians, there's not much that they can do on an individual basis except boycotting, avoiding buying U.S. goods, or avoiding or delaying travel to the United States. And it looks like a significant proportion of Canadians not only are doing that, but believe that it is helpful or somewhat helpful.
Across Canada, a quiet but powerful wave of resistance is still rolling. Months after President Trump's sweeping import duties triggered a North American trade war, the boycott of U.S. goods and tourism has not disappeared. It is still growing. In supermarkets from Halifax to Vancouver, shoppers are reading the fine print on every label. Families planning winter trips to Florida are changing their destinations. Local stores now proudly display signs saying, "Made in Canada," and the message behind them is unmistakable. Canadians are choosing their side.
According to a new Nanos research poll, 4 out of 5 Canadians say that boycotting American-made stuff or avoiding tourism to the United States altogether will strengthen our country's bargaining position in the ongoing trade war launched by President Trump.
According to a new Nanos research poll released in October 2025, 4 out of 5 Canadians, roughly 80% of the population, believe that refusing to buy American products or avoiding travel to the United States strengthens Canada's bargaining position in the trade dispute launched by Washington earlier this year. Only 18% said the boycott is not helpful. What began as a policy fight between governments has become a movement of everyday citizens using their spending power as a form of quiet defiance. In a country known for moderation and diplomacy, this is a striking show of national unity.
When the Trump administration raised tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, furniture, and auto parts in early 2025, the intention was to force Ottawa into concessions. But the impact went beyond government offices and boardrooms. It reached directly into households. The numbers tell the story. In February, new import duties ranging from 10 to 35% were imposed under U.S. national security rules. By mid-year, the U.S. Department of Commerce reported that the average input cost in the auto sector had already risen by more than 12%. For Canada, a country whose manufacturing corridor depends on cross-border supply chains, this was devastating. Factories struggled and border paperwork multiplied, yet instead of backing down, Canadians began to adapt. A consumer shift took hold. Older Canadians led the charge. 85% of those aged 55 and above told Nanos research they support the boycott. Among those aged 35 to 54, 74% agreed. Support was strongest in Atlantic Canada and Quebec, where local industries have been hardest hit by the tariffs. What makes this moment different is the scope of participation. It is not limited to activists or politicians. Ordinary citizens, retirees, and small business owners are joining the movement. Even travel data shows a tangible decline in Canadian tourism to the United States, especially in border states like Vermont, Michigan, and New York. Tourism agencies in those areas have begun warning of lower bookings and declining retail sales. A strategy meant to isolate Canada is now hurting communities across the U.S. that depend on Canadian visitors.
The boycott has turned into something larger than a consumer reaction. It has become a political signal. Trump's tariffs were supposed to pressure Ottawa by weakening its economy. Instead, they have strengthened the idea of economic independence. In practical terms, 3 consequences are now visible. First, consumer backlash. Canadians have internalized the dispute. Each purchase or canceled trip has become an act of self-assertion. Second, economic spillover. U.S. businesses near the border are feeling the loss of Canadian customers, especially in tourism and retail. Reports from regional chambers of commerce show significant declines in cross-border spending since the summer. Third, political momentum. The boycott gives Prime Minister Mark Carney's government greater leverage in ongoing negotiations with Washington ahead of the 2026 USMCA review. Public opinion is now firmly behind him. Data from the Nanos poll also reveals a supermajority effect. 54% of Canadians called the boycott very helpful, and another 26% say it is somewhat helpful. Combined, that's an overwhelming national consensus rarely seen in modern politics. The Trump administration may not have anticipated this. By using tariffs to project strength, it has sparked a collective determination among Canadians to protect their own markets. The White House expected economic pressure. Instead, it has encountered a surge of unity that crosses age, region, and political lines.
The ripple effects are already visible. For decades, Canada's economy was deeply intertwined with the United States, from auto parts in Ontario to grain exports in the prairies and energy shipments from Alberta. Now that dependence is being reevaluated.
In response to trade uncertainty, Ottawa is encouraging a Buy Canadian strategy across public procurement while exploring new export partnerships with the European Union and several Asian economies. The government is also using this moment to mobilize U.S. border states, reminding them that Canadian consumers are vital to their own economic stability. Within Canada, the boycott has taken on symbolic power. It represents more than protest. It signals a shift in national confidence, that Canadians, as individuals, can influence the direction of trade policy through their collective choices. In a global economy dominated by superpowers, that sense of agency is rare. Meanwhile, for Washington, the consequences are growing harder to ignore. Cross-border travel is down, tourism revenue in key U.S. regions has slipped, and public sentiment in Canada has hardened. Each of these developments chips away at the soft power the U.S. once enjoyed across its northern border. In trying to teach Canada a lesson, Trump has instead taught Canadians something else, that resilience and economic loyalty can be a form of sovereignty. The boycott may have started as a small act of frustration, but today it stands as a symbol of how ordinary people can shape the balance of power in a trade war.